video.
Nah, I don't care.
We'll cut the other two.
I'm recording you, everyone.
That's cool. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Ben Brower. I'm a lieutenant with the Carrollton Volunteer Fire Department. I'm also a paid firefighter in the city of Suffolk. I'm here today to give you guys a presentation on the history of the fire service and just a few of our many traditions. Most people think that Ben Franklin was the inventor of the fire service. He was not. The first records of an actual organized fire department date back to 23 BC under Caesar Augustus in Rome. These were called servants to the Commonwealth, and they were actually soldiers who just walked around at night and checked to make sure people were putting their fires out before they went to bed. In 6 AD, after a large catastrophic fire in Rome, the Romans created what was called a vigil. And a vigil did one of two things. It was actually a security force that patrolled the city to make sure no one was breaking in or no laws were being broken. And then they also checked to make sure people were putting their fires out and that fires weren't starting. After the fall of Rome, people fell into the Dark Ages, and a lot of these previous practices went by the wayside. People started building houses out of thatch, which is a mixture of twigs and straw, and we're actually building chimneys out of wood, which by today's standards we couldn't imagine, but that was commonplace back in the 10, 1100s. In 1100 AD, the first laws and ordinances were passed in London, declaring there were to be no thatched roofs, and also requiring party walls, which is a stone wall between two buildings to make sure fires don't spread from one building to the other. This was after the city of London burned down multiple times over the past century. Between 1631 and 1676, the city of Boston burned to the ground 3 times. Finally, after the 3rd time, they created the first formal fire codes in North America. In 1871, October 8th, 1871, was the Great Chicago Fire, where roughly a third of the city burned down. This fire was kind of an eye-opener for the American people in regards to fire safety, and we still remember that by Fire Safety Week, which is always the 2nd week in October. Many people believe the story of Miss O'Leary's cow kicking over a lantern and setting the city on fire. This has actually never been proven. A little local history. Excuse me. The city of Norfolk became the 3rd fully paid fire department in the United States. On December 15th, there was a large riot in the city between the many volunteer companies because they were all fighting for insurance money, because whoever put the fire out got the money from the insurance company. And a couple firefighters actually died, and houses continued to burn because they were all outside fighting. Finally, the mayor and the citizens has had enough and just said no more volunteers, and the city went completely paid on December 15th, 1871. We're going to go over a few of the fire service traditions that we have that many people may see and wonder what the history is behind that. We'll start with the fire helmet. The fire helmet actually hasn't changed all that much in over 200 years. The first records of some sort of protective cap worn by firefighters date back to 1740. A man named Jacob Turnkey in New York City took a top hat and just put a second layer of leather around it, which made it a little sturdier and a little more protection, offered a little bit more protection. The exact date that the next fire helmet was invented, the fire helmet that we know today, isn't very well known. People know it was either between 1821 to 1836 by a man named Henry Graticat. What he did, he was a volunteer firefighter in New York City, and for his job he made luggage, specifically luggage that was used for overseas travel. At the time, people had an issue with luggage getting put on boats, and then the sea salt and the water corroding the luggage and it's falling apart. They have to buy new luggage every time they went overseas. He invented a way to treat the leather so that it wouldn't be susceptible to dry rot. Obviously, if the firefighter gets their helmets wet, this would be a advantage. So, sometime in the mid-1800s, he first started using his technique to treat leather and make fire helmets out of it. The actual shape and design of this helmet was called a New Yorker, and people are still wearing a very similar product today. The Carnes brothers, who were in New York City around the same time, made metal badges. And what they had the idea to do is take these metal badges and put it on the front of Mr. Gratacap's helmet. And that way people would know what fire company you were with. And that tradition still stays. Like I said, the actual fire helmet's design hasn't changed a whole lot. There's certain modernized versions, but the traditional leather New Yorker style helmet is still worn by firefighters across the country. Another tradition of the fire service is a Dalmatian. First records of Dalmatians date back to the 1600s in Eastern Europe. They were used as shepherds, they were used as hunting dogs, they were used as performing dogs in circuses because they had an excellent memory. They could be taught many tricks and they could do them one after another every night. These dogs are extremely intelligent and extremely loyal. In the mid-1700s, the dogs were found to have a calming effect on horses. They're used to keep the horses company and protect them at night in the stables so that someone didn't have to stay out there with them. They would run beside the horses to keep wild dogs from attacking them. It wasn't that uncommon at all in 17th or 18th century England to see a team of horses pulling royalty with a Dalmatian trailing behind. After the Civil War, horses were introduced to the fire service to pull the bigger, heavier steam engines. Before, they were actually pulled by people. They would pull them to the fire and then pump them by hand. Along with the horses came the Dalmatian. People or fire companies would invest a lot of money in these horses because they had to be the biggest draft horses you could buy because of the weight of these steam engines. They were used to protect the horses and the equipment from thieves or vandals or other fire companies trying to sabotage their fire company. When the last horses in the U.S. Fire Service were put to pasture in the 1920s, the Dalmatian just kind of stuck around as a symbol or as a tradition. Not a lot of firehouses now can actually have Dalmatians or have dogs in them, but a lot of firefighters will still have Dalmatians as pets. I did. The last tradition we're going to go over is why fire engines are red. Every day you're sitting at a stoplight, you see a red fire engine go flying past you. Where that started, the most widely accepted reason dates back to the 1800s when the majority of fire departments were still volunteer. Volunteers took a lot of pride in their pumps, and they wanted them to be the best, look the best, be the shiniest, and at the time red was the most expensive paint. They would also do a method called gold leafing, where they would actually take gold and rub it onto the side of the truck in lines, and it looked very ornate. Another reason was when automobiles were first introduced, especially the Model T, you could only get it in black. So they would continue to paint fire trucks red because they would stand out when going down the road. Today, you can find fire trucks painted any color of the rainbow. In fact, there is a cosmetic company called Mary Kay that actually has pink fire trucks protecting their primary manufacturing plant. Recently, within the past 20 to 30 years, some studies have shown colors like lime green are actually a little bit more visible and a little bit safer, but the fire service being what it is, we like to stick to our traditions, so you'll still find the majority of fire trucks are actually still red. So next time you're sitting in an intersection, a fire truck goes racing by, consider the 200-300 years plus of tradition that goes back into